Welcome back. With Nepal's Maoists alleging irregularities in an election with a record voter turnout, Nepal's transition to a democracy has run into rough weather even before a new constituent assembly could hope to do what its predecessors had failed to do.
India watched closely as neighboring Nepal conducted what could be historic national elections. The country had thrown out its monarch several years ago, but hasn't been able to find a stable government since. The prevalent political parties could not agree on what kind of government was needed in 2008, and since then, Nepal has had 5 governments. The economy is flagging and poverty and militancy is rising. And the national election this week to elect a 601-member Constituent Assembly was perhaps a final chance before Nepal becomes a haven for terrorists and chaos.
कालीन चुनौतीका बीच सम्पन्न आजको निर्वाचन स्वतन्त्र र निष्पक्ष रूपमा सम्पन्न भएको जानकारी गराउन पाउँदा मलाई हर्ष र गौरव लागेको छ.
From the Indian point of view, an indecisive verdict could mean instability in the friendly country, where the Chinese could play an increasingly bigger role. The aftermath of the elections isn't promising either. The Maoists, one of the 3 big parties along with the Nepali Congress and the unified Marxist-Leninist Party, have decided not to accept the outcome of the poll. And this after reports indicated that its leader Prachanda was losing.
अब हामीले त प्रष्ट भन्यौं यो सबै चीजहरुको पुनरावलोकन गरेर मात्रै अर्को कदम चालियोस्. अब निर्वाचन आयोगले रोकेन, अन्य दलले रोकेनन् भने हामी यो प्रक्रियाबाट अलग हुन्छौं. यो प्रक्रियामा हामी रहँदैनौं. अलग भनेको के हो? हामी संविधान सभामा हुँदैनौं.
This is a worry sign for India, which helped to conduct the polls, an unclear mandate and also a spurt in violence. 30 people have been injured in the aftermath. India is worried because Nepal is the route through which fake currency comes in, as do terrorists and Maoist guerrillas. Moreover, there is always the growing influence of China.
It is quite clear in terms of what China is up to in Nepal, that it is part of this aggressive posture that is behind their statements on Japan, on the South China Sea, and on various important Asian and international issues. Having said that, they have now increased their involvement and engagement in Nepal. There's no doubt about that.
A failure to form a stable government in Nepal could disappoint India, which has been pushing for the new democratic order to become effective. Thus, New Delhi will be watching closely as the political landscape changes yet again in Kathmandu.
Unless Nepal can make the most of these elections, the optimism of its voters could soon turn to bitterness and undo the gains of the recent past. And joining us on the show is the former Indian ambassador to Nepal, Mr. Jayant Prasad. Mr. Prasad, my first question. Even though these elections in Nepal are being seen as an assertion of Nepalese sovereign rights, but the absence of political clarity and the multiplicity of political parties could perhaps lead to the same state of affairs as was with the previous Constituent Assembly, which failed to do anything. Or could it be any different now?
Maruf, you are right in suggesting that there is a fragmentation of the Nepalese political parties, which is very disquieting. But look at the positive side. The positive side is that many different streams of opinion are represented this time in the Constituent Assembly. I dare say a little bit more than the previous Constituent Assembly. And it represents the broadest spectrum of views. And the second is that having failed the first time round in having a constitution at the end of 4 years of the CA, this time the political leadership cannot afford to fail. Otherwise, this system that they are trying to create of multi-party democracy will be discredited.
The previous elections had brought the Maoists of Nepal back into the political fold and led them to shed violence. But with their now denouncing the election process, is it possible that Nepal could now slide back into violence if things don't work the way the Maoists want them to work?
Well, there is a little bit of danger of that happening, Maruf. But our hope and expectation is that it won't, because Pushp Kamal Dahal Prachand came out with a statement Thursday morning where he decried the election process, alleged that there was widespread rigging, but kept the line of communication open by saying that he would abide by the past commitments made by the Maoist party to join the mainstream and to keep wedded to multi-party democracy. That's a good sign.
The international community, especially India, has welcomed the elections and the large turnout. But how do you see India's fortune shaping up after these elections?
Maruf, India has no special axe to grind in Nepal other than to seek Nepal's progress and prosperity. But for that, they must have a constitution. And for having the constitution, the election of a new CA was imperative. Every time there has been political change in Nepal, India has stood solidly behind the Nepalese people, whether it was the change from the Rana autocracy to the monarchy in 1950, or the change to constitutional monarchy in 1990-91, or the aftermath of the Jan Andolan of 2006, when Nepal declared itself to be a republic. India has always stood behind the Nepali people, and there is a good chance that if Nepal stabilizes, then Nepal's enormous natural resources can be a source of wealth for the Nepalese people and can be a source of energy for India and the rest of the subcontinent.
There is apparently a certain degree of resentment amongst the Nepalese on the clout that India enjoys in Kathmandu. Why is that so? And is India doing enough to counter China's growing influence in Nepal?
You know, one of the reasons why there is resentment is that the interaction of the Nepalese is so overwhelmingly with India. They have a resident population in Nepal today of 27 million people. But as you would very well know, 6 to 7 million Nepalese live and work in India, and they are treated on par with Indian citizens. We look at Nepal's exports, for example. 71% of their exports are destined to India and less than 2% to China. So despite all the hype about increasing Chinese and Nepalese growing ties, which they should grow because China is the other important neighbor of Nepal, there is a degree of obsession of the Nepalese media with India, which is unavoidable. And as the relationship, as Nepal becomes more prosperous and Nepal gets more stabilized, the relationship is bound to improve. Incidentally, at this point of time, India and China desire the same outcomes in Nepal. We both want stability there. We both want progress there. And the Nepalese leadership is well aware of it. The Chinese leaders, when they visit Nepal in private and public, say this.
India clearly has a number of advantages in Nepal. But the big question is, till how long can India continue to maintain those advantages in Nepal against the growing influence of the Chinese all around India, as we've seen in other neighboring countries of India as well? That's all in this episode of Latitude. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, thank you for being with us and goodbye.